The twilight sky was streaked with crimson and gold as Rose Gallagher clutched her father's pocket watch, the only possession she had left besides the clothes on her back, and the deed to a mine that had brought nothing but heartache since her arrival in Black Hawk, Colorado. The mining town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains had seemed like salvation when she'd fled Boston 3 months ago, but now it threatened to become her undoing. The autumn wind whipped around her as she stood at the edge of town, staring at the imposing estate that belonged to Victor Montgomery, the land baron who controlled nearly everything and everyone in Black Hawk. His ultimatum still rang in her ears from their meeting earlier that day. Get out of town by dawn or face consequences worse than destitution. Rose had come west in 1876, following her father's death, armed with nothing but determination and the deed to a silver mine he had purchased sight unseen. The mine had been her inheritance, her chance at independence in a world that offered few options for a woman alone. But 3 months of struggle had yielded no silver, only mounting debts and Montgomery's increasing interest in acquiring her seemingly worthless claim. "You look like you're planning to run, Miss Gallagher." The deep voice startled her, and Rose whirled around to find Xavier Sullivan leaning against a nearby hitching post. The cowboy's tall frame was silhouetted against the darkening sky, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his worn hat. She'd seen him around town, working at the livery stable, occasionally riding with the cattle drives that passed through. He had a reputation for keeping to himself, for being fair but formidable. "Mr. Montgomery has made it clear my presence is no longer welcome in Black Hawk," Rose replied, lifting her chin despite the tremble in her voice. "I have until dawn." Xavier pushed away from the post and stepped closer, close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes. "Montgomery doesn't own this town, no matter what he thinks. He owns enough of it." Rose clutched the deed tighter. "The bank, the mercantile, the hotel, and he wants my mine." "The silver spur," Xavier raised an eyebrow. "That worthless hole in the ground," Rose bristled. "It's not worthless." "My father wouldn't have," she stopped herself, unwilling to reveal her doubts to a stranger. "Montgomery's been buying up every claim within 20 miles, Xavier said, his voice low. "Worthless or not, he wants them all." "Well, he can have mine. I just need enough to secure passage back east." Xavier's expression hardened. "You're selling?" "What choice do I have? He's made it impossible for me to stay. I can't get credit at the mercantile. The hotel doubled my rate. Even Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house received advice that taking me in would be unwise." "So you're just going to let him win?" The disappointment in Xavier's tone stung more than it should have. "I didn't come west to fight battles I can't win, Mr. Sullivan." Xavier stepped closer, and in the fading light, Rose could see a scar running along his jawline, a testament to some past struggle. "What if the mine isn't worthless? What if Montgomery knows something you don't?" The thought had occurred to Rose more than once. "That's a lovely fantasy, but I've spent 3 months trying to make that mine produce. Alone. I hired men. They quit after Montgomery offered them better wages elsewhere." Xavier removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. "You hired the wrong men." Rose narrowed her eyes. "And I suppose you're the right man." A slow smile spread across his face. "I worked silver mines in Nevada before I took to wrangling cattle. I know a thing or two about finding a vein." "Why would you help me?" Rose asked, suspicion clear in her voice. "Let's just say Montgomery and I have history, and I owe him nothing but trouble." Xavier replaced his hat. "Besides, I don't much like seeing a woman forced from her rightful property. Even a woman he claims is unfit to own property because of her gender and Eastern sensibilities. Especially that woman." Xavier's eyes glinted with something Rose couldn't quite identify: determination, perhaps, or a deeper anger. Montgomery's been unchallenged for too long. Mr. Sullivan, Xavier. Xavier, she amended, testing the name. I appreciate the sentiment, but this isn't your fight. I'm making it my fight. He squared his shoulders. You're not going anywhere at dawn, Miss Gallagher. Rose, she corrected automatically. Rose, he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep timbre. Montgomery told you to be gone by dawn. I'm telling you, you're staying right here in Black Hawk. Rose felt a flutter of something, hope, perhaps, but quickly tamped it down. And when Montgomery's men come looking for me, they'll find me instead. The certainty in Xavier's voice made Rose believe, if only for a moment, that she wasn't alone in this fight. One man against Montgomery's hired guns. Those aren't good odds. I'm not alone either. Xavier glanced down the street toward the saloon. There are others in town who have had enough of Montgomery's ways. Rose followed his gaze. You're suggesting some kind of alliance. I'm suggesting that Montgomery doesn't speak for all of Black Hawk, and that your mine might be worth more than you think. For the first time in months, Rose felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. And if it isn't, then at least you'll have stood your ground. Sometimes that's worth more than silver. The night was closing in around them, the temperature dropping as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Rose shivered, partly from cold, partly from the weight of the decision before her. I don't have much to offer in return for your help, she admitted. I'm not asking for anything. Xavier's expression was solemn. Just a chance to right some wrongs. Rose studied him carefully. This man was a stranger, offering help when she needed it most. It could be a trap, another of Montgomery's schemes to pry the deed from her hands. Yet something about Xavier Sullivan's steady gaze made her want to trust him. If I stay, she said slowly, Montgomery will make life even more difficult. Yes, Xavier agreed, not sugarcoating the truth, but you won't face it alone. Rose took a deep breath, the cool mountain air filling her lungs. My father always said that nothing worth having comes easy. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Rose straightened her shoulders. And he believed in this mine. Perhaps it's time I truly honored that belief. Xavier nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. We should get you somewhere safe for tonight. Montgomery has eyes everywhere. I have nowhere to go, Rose reminded him. The boarding house won't take me. The hotel is Montgomery's, and I've been sleeping in the assay office, but the assayer made it clear that arrangement ends tonight. Xavier considered this. I know a place. It's not fancy, but it's secure. Lead the way, Mr. Sullivan. Rose gestured forward, then hesitated. I hope I'm not making a terrible mistake. Trust goes both ways, Miss Gallagher. Xavier offered his arm. I'm betting my life that you're worth fighting for. The statement hung between them, fraught with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Rose slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid warmth of him even through his coat. Together, they walked away from the edge of town, toward an uncertain future, but one that, for the first time since her arrival in Black Hawk, held a glimmer of possibility. Xavier led Rose through the darkened streets, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main thoroughfare. The town had settled into its evening rhythm. Piano music drifted from the saloon, mingling with raucous laughter and occasional shouts. A few doors down, the church stood silent, its windows dark. Where exactly are we going? Rose whispered, her boots crunching softly on the dirt road. Old Man Tanner's cabin, Xavier replied, scanning the street ahead. He was a prospector who passed last winter. The place has stood empty since. It's on the edge of town, past the livery. Won't someone notice? Xavier guided her around a corner. Most folks avoid it. There are rumors it's haunted. Despite her situation, Rose couldn't help but smile. And is it only by memories? His voice held a note of something somber. Tanner was a friend. They continued in silence, the town gradually thinning out until they reached a small, weathered cabin set back from the road, nearly hidden by a stand of pines. Xavier approached cautiously, checking the surroundings before guiding Rose to the door. "Wait here," he murmured, drawing a pistol from beneath his coat. Rose's heart quickened as Xavier pushed open the door and disappeared inside. Moments later he reappeared, holstering his weapon. All clear. It's dusty but sound. Rose stepped inside, Xavier closing the door behind her. The cabin was simple, one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs and a small cupboard. A layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed until their arrival. "No one's been here in months," Xavier confirmed, moving to the fireplace. He crouched down, arranging kindling and wood from a nearby stack. "Should we risk a fire?" Rose asked, concerned. "Won't someone see the smoke?" "It's cold enough that most cabins have smoke rising. Besides, I'd rather risk being seen than have you freeze." He struck a match, the small flame illuminating his concentrated expression before he touched it to the kindling. "There are extra blankets in that trunk." Rose moved to the wooden chest, lifting the heavy lid to find neatly folded quilts. She pulled them out, dust particles dancing in the air around her. "How did you know about this place?" she asked, bringing the blankets to the bed. Xavier remained focused on nursing the growing flames. "Like I said, Tanner was a friend. One of the first people I met when I came to Black Hawk 3 years ago. You're not from here originally?" "No." His answer was clipped, discouraging further inquiry, but after a moment he continued. "I was born in Texas, moved around a lot after the war." Rose seated herself on one of the wooden chairs, watching as Xavier's skilled hands built the fire into a steady blaze. "The Civil War," he nodded, "fought for the Union, came west afterward like a lot of men who couldn't settle back into normal life." "My father fought as well," Rose offered. "He was never the same after Gettysburg." Xavier's eyes met hers across the room, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. "War changes a man." "Yes." Rose looked down at her hands, still clutching her father's pocket watch. "It took his leg first, then slowly the rest of him." Xavier stood, dusting off his hands. "I'm sorry." "It was his heart in the end," Rose continued, unsure why she was sharing such personal details with this near stranger. "He died believing the mine would secure my future. And instead, it brought you to the attention of Victor Montgomery." Xavier's expression darkened. "Montgomery has a habit of collecting what others value." "How do you know him?" Xavier moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "We crossed paths in Denver before I came here. He was buying up foreclosed properties after the Panic of '73. "The bank failures," Rose nodded. Her own family had suffered financial setbacks during that time. "He built his fortune on other people's misfortune," Xavier said grimly, "and he's been doing the same here in Black Hawk. But why would he want my mine if it's worthless?" Rose asked, returning to the question that had been nagging at her. Xavier turned from the window. "That's what we need to find out. First thing tomorrow we're going to visit your claim." "We?" Rose raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate your help tonight, but Xavier," he corrected. "And yes, we. Unless you've changed your mind about leaving town." Rose hesitated. The logical part of her knew she should take what money Montgomery had offered and leave. But there was something else, pride, perhaps, or her father's stubborn streak that she'd inherited that rebelled against being forced out. "No," she said finally. "I'm not leaving, not like this." "Good." Xavier's approval warmed her more than it should have. "Now try to get some rest. Dawn will be here before you know it." "And what about you?" Rose gestured to the single bed. "I'll take the floor." He moved to the trunk, pulling out another blanket. "I've slept on worse." Rose wanted to protest, but found she hadn't the energy. The events of the day had left her exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. "Thank you," she said instead, "for everything." Xavier nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Get some sleep, Rose. Tomorrow we fight back." As Rose settled onto the narrow bed, still fully clothed but covered with tanner's quilts, she watched Xavier arrange his makeshift bedding near the fire. He moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to making do with limited comforts. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked, her voice quiet in the dimly lit cabin. Xavier was silent for so long that Rose thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his back still to her. "Because 20 years ago my mother faced a similar choice. She didn't have anyone to stand with her." The simple statement carried the weight of years of pain. Rose wanted to ask more, but sensed he had shared as much as he was willing to for now. "I'm sorry," she offered instead. Xavier nodded once, then stretched out on his blanket, hat tipped over his eyes. "Good night, Rose." "Good night, Xavier." As the fire crackled and shadows danced across the cabin walls, Rose found herself studying the outline of the man who had placed himself between her and disaster. A stranger yesterday, an ally today. What would he be tomorrow? With that question unanswered, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, her hand still clutching her father's watch, the deed to the Silver Spur mine safely tucked inside her bodice. Dawn arrived with a gentle persistence, rays of sunlight filtering through the cabin's small, grimy window. Rose blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day rushed back Montgomery's ultimatum, Xavier's intervention, their refuge in Tanner's cabin. She sat up, glancing around the small space. The fire had died to embers, and Xavier's blanket lay neatly folded on the floor. The man himself was nowhere to be seen. A flutter of panic rose in Rose's chest. Had he abandoned her? Or worse, had Montgomery's men found them? The door creaked open, and Rose tensed, relief flooding through her when Xavier stepped inside, a canvas bag in one hand and a canteen in the other. "You're awake," he observed, setting his burdens on the table. "I thought I'd be back before you stirred. Where did you go?" Rose asked, pushing back the blankets and standing. She smoothed her rumpled skirt, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after sleeping in her clothes. "Supply run," Xavier replied, opening the bag to reveal bread, cheese, and apples. "And to check if Montgomery's men were looking for you yet." Rose moved to the table, eyeing the food. She hadn't eaten since noon yesterday, and her stomach reminded her of this fact with an embarrassing growl. "Go on," Xavier encouraged. "We need to keep up our strength." Rose didn't need to be told twice. She took an apple, biting into its crisp flesh. "And are they looking for me?" Xavier nodded, breaking the bread and offering her half. "2 men were asking at the boarding house when I passed by. Mrs. Wilson told them you'd already left town on the morning stage." "She lied for me." Rose was surprised. The boarding house proprietor had been polite but distant during Rose's brief stay. "It seems not everyone is as firmly under Montgomery's thumb as he believes." Xavier took a drink from the canteen before passing it to Rose. "I also stopped by the livery. We'll need horses to reach your mine." "You've been busy," Rose commented, accepting the water. "What time is it?" Xavier pulled out a pocket watch, flipping it open. "Just past 7. Montgomery expected me gone by now." "Yes." Xavier's expression was grim. "Which is why we need to move quickly. Finish eating and we'll head for the Silver Spur." Rose complied, savoring the simple meal more than many fine dinners she'd had in Boston. When they'd eaten their fill, Xavier packed the remaining food and stepped outside to check that the coast was clear. "We'll go out the back way," he decided upon returning. "Skirt around behind the livery. My horse is ready, and I've secured a mare for you." "You're very thorough," Rose observed, gathering her few possessions. Xavier's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "In my line of work, details matter." "And what exactly is your line of work, Mr. Sullivan? You've mentioned mining and cattle, but I suspect there's more." The smile faded. "Let's just say I've had various occupations. Right now, my job is keeping you safe and finding out why Montgomery wants your claim." Rose wanted to press further but recognized the finality in his tone. Instead, she followed him out the back door and through a narrow path that wound between buildings and stands of pine trees. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows until they reached the rear of the livery stable. Two horses stood saddled and waiting, Xavier's large black gelding and a smaller dun mare. Xavier helped Rose mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, a sensation she quickly dismissed as they set off at a trot toward the mountains that rose beyond town. They rode in silence for the first mile, both alert for signs of pursuit. Once the town was well behind them, Xavier relaxed slightly, allowing his horse to fall in beside Rose's. "Tell me about the mine," he said. "When did your father purchase it?" Rose adjusted her grip on the reins. "Last year. He bought it from a man named Ellis who came through Boston claiming the Colorado silver mines were playing out and he wanted to try his luck in the Yukon." "Ellis," Xavier repeated, frowning. "Samuel Ellis." "Yes, that's right. Did you know him?" Xavier's expression darkened. "I knew of him. He was one of Montgomery's associates, specialized in selling bogus mining claims to Easterners." Rose's stomach dropped. "So the mine truly is worthless?" "Not necessarily," Xavier cautioned. "Ellis was a con man, yes, but he was also shrewd. He wouldn't sell a claim that might actually produce unless he had to." "What do you mean?" "I mean, there might be more to the silver spur than meets the eye." Xavier pointed ahead to where the trail began to climb more steeply. "How far up is your claim?" "About 3 miles," Rose replied. "There's a small cabin and the mine entrance just beyond that ridge." They continued riding, the trail growing narrower and more treacherous. Rose, who had learned to ride as a child but had few opportunities in recent years, found herself grateful for the sure-footed mare beneath her. "You handle a horse well," Xavier observed, guiding his gelding around a fallen tree. "My mother would be horrified to see me riding astride," Rose admitted with a small smile. "She insisted ladies should only ride side saddle. Hard to navigate these mountain trails side saddle." "Hard to do much of anything practical side saddle," Rose replied. "Though I suppose a proper Boston lady shouldn't be concerned with practicality." Xavier glanced at her, amusement in his eyes. "You don't strike me as a woman overly concerned with propriety." "I wasn't," Rose acknowledged. "Much to my mother's dismay, she had hoped I would make an advantageous marriage, settle into society life. And instead, you came west to work a silver mine." "I came west because I had no other options," Rose corrected. "My father's debts left little choice. The mine was all that remained." Xavier nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Sometimes the path we're forced to take leads us exactly where we need to be." The philosophical observation surprised Rose. "You sound like you've given this some thought." "I've had my share of forced paths," Xavier replied. He pointed ahead to where the trees thinned. "Is that your cabin?" Rose followed his gaze to the small, weathered structure that sat nestled against the mountainside. "Yes, that's it. The mine entrance is just beyond into the rock face." They approached cautiously, Xavier signaling for Rose to stay back while he circled the cabin. Finding no signs of recent visitors, he dismounted and helped Rose down from her mare. "Let's have a look inside," he suggested, drawing his pistol once more. The cabin was even smaller than Tanner's, a single room with a stove, a rickety table, and a cot. Rose had spent her first week in Colorado here before the isolation and difficulty of working the mine alone had driven her to seek lodging in town. "Not much to it," Xavier commented, holstering his weapon after ensuring the cabin was empty. "It served its purpose," Rose said, running a finger along the dusty table. "Though I admit I was grateful for the comparative luxury of Mrs. Wilson's boarding house." Xavier moved to the window, looking out toward the mine entrance. "Show me the claim." They secured the horses and walked the short distance to where the mine tunnel burrowed into the mountainside. The entrance was partially obscured by brush that had grown in the months since Rose had abandoned her efforts here. "How far does it go back?" Xavier asked, pulling away branches to reveal the dark opening. "About 50 yards before it dead ends," Rose replied. "I hired 2 men to help me expand it, but after 3 weeks of finding nothing but rock, they quit." Xavier pulled a lantern from his saddlebag and lit it. "Let's have a look." Rose followed him into the tunnel, the air growing cooler and damper as they moved deeper into the mountain. The lantern light cast long shadows against the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the marks of pickaxes and shovels. Xavier moved slowly, examining the rock face with experienced eyes. Occasionally, he would stop, run his hand along the wall, or chip at it with a small hammer he'd brought. "Your hired men were digging in the wrong direction," he said after several minutes of examination. "What do you mean?" Rose moved closer, the tunnel narrowing as they went deeper. Xavier held the lantern higher, illuminating a fault line in the rock. "See this?" He traced a faint vein of darker material. "They should have followed this seam. It's heading upward at an angle." Rose leaned in, trying to see what Xavier found so interesting. "Does that mean there might be silver?" "It means it's worth investigating further," Xavier replied cautiously. "This type of formation often indicates mineralization nearby." Hope flared in Rose's chest, but she tempered it with caution. "If there is silver here, why wouldn't Ellis have found it? Or the men I hired?" Xavier continued examining the rock face. "Ellis was probably looking for a quick score. If it didn't yield immediately, he'd move on. As for your men—" He paused, chipping at the rock again. How much was Montgomery paying them to report back to him? The implication stunned Rose. "You think they were working for him all along?" "I think Montgomery doesn't make moves without information," Xavier replied. "And I think he's very interested in this particular piece of ground." He stepped back, surveying the tunnel. "We need proper tools to investigate further." They emerged from the mine into the bright midday sun, Rose blinking as her eyes adjusted to the light. Xavier seemed deep in thought, his brow furrowed as he secured the lantern back in his saddlebag. "What are you thinking?" Rose asked. "I'm thinking we need help," Xavier admitted. "Someone who knows these mountains better than I do, and someone Montgomery doesn't control." "Is there such a person in Black Hawk?" Xavier nodded, checking his pocket watch again. "There is, but first, we need to secure this site. If Montgomery realizes you haven't left town, this is the first place he'll look." "How do we secure it?" Xavier grinned, a flash of mischief in his eyes that transformed his usually serious face. "We make it look like we have." Over the next hour, Xavier showed Rose how to create the illusion of an abandoned camp. They disturbed the dust in the cabin, left a torn piece of Rose's handkerchief caught on a nail near the door, and scattered a few personal items a hairpin. A page torn from a book along the trail leading away from the mine, in the direction of the nearest stage-coach route. Montgomery's men will think you came back for your belongings before leaving town, Xavier explained as they mounted their horses again. And where are we really going? Rose asked. To see an old friend, Xavier replied, turning his horse not toward town but further into the mountains. Someone who knows more about these hills than anyone alive. They rode for another hour, the trail growing steeper and less defined. Rose was beginning to wonder if Xavier knew where he was going when they crested a ridge and came upon a small valley nestled between peaks. A cabin stood in the center, smoke rising from its chimney. "Who lives all the way up here?" Rose asked as they approached. "Daniel Blackfoot," Xavier replied. "He was Ute before the government forced his people onto reservations. He refused to go, took a white name, and has been living in these mountains for 40 years. If anyone can tell us what's really in your mind, it's Daniel." They dismounted in front of the cabin, and Xavier gave a distinctive whistle. The door opened immediately, revealing an elderly man with long silver hair and deeply lined features. He wore buckskin pants and a flannel shirt, a pipe clenched between his teeth. "Sullivan," he greeted, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "Been wondering when you'd show up." "You were expecting me?" Xavier asked, surprise evident in his tone. Daniel Blackfoot's dark eyes twinkled. "Heard Montgomery's been making noise about a woman with a mining claim. Figured you'd be in the middle of it somehow." His gaze shifted to Rose. "This her?" "Daniel, this is Rose Gallagher," Xavier introduced. "Rose, Daniel Blackfoot, Miss Gallagher," Daniel nodded respectfully. "Come inside. Not safe to talk in the open even up here." The interior of Daniel's cabin was surprisingly comfortable, with well-crafted furniture, shelves of books, and various artifacts that spoke of both his Ute heritage and his decades of living in the mountains. He gestured for them to sit while he poured coffee from a pot that hung over the fire. "Montgomery's been looking for something in these mountains for years," Daniel said without preamble, handing them each a cup of strong black coffee. "Started with buying up abandoned claims, then moved on to pressuring folks to sell." "Looking for what?" Rose asked. Daniel settled into a chair, puffing on his pipe. "That's the question, isn't it? Some say gold, others silver, but I think it's something else entirely." Xavier leaned forward. "The Silver Spur mine, have you been there?" "Many times," Daniel confirmed. "Before it was a mine, that spot was considered sacred by my people. There's a spring that runs deep under the mountain there." "A spring?" Rose frowned. "I never saw any water." "It's there," Daniel assured her. "Deep. Comes out about a mile downstream. The waters have healing properties. My people used them for generations before the white settlers came." Xavier and Rose exchanged glances. "You think Montgomery wants the mine for a water source?" Xavier asked skeptically. Daniel shook his head. "Not just any water. This spring carries trace minerals that can be used in medicine. A doctor from Denver came through 10 years back, tested the waters, got very excited. Said they contained minerals that could treat ailments of the lungs." Understanding dawned on Rose's face. "And with so many suffering from consumption and mining-related lung diseases, a medicine like that would be worth a fortune," Xavier concluded. "More than silver," Daniel agreed. "Montgomery likely knows this. The doctor who discovered it was a friend of his." Rose sat back, processing this information. "So my mine isn't worthless after all." "Far from it," Daniel confirmed. "But its true value isn't in precious metals." Xavier stood, pacing the small cabin. "We need to find that spring, document its properties. If we can prove what's there, Montgomery can't simply take it." "The entrance is hidden," Daniel said. "I can show you, but not today. It'll be dark soon, and these mountains are dangerous at night." "We can't go back to town," Xavier pointed out. "Montgomery will be looking for Rose." Daniel waved a hand dismissively. You'll stay here tonight, I have room. Rose began to protest the impropriety of spending another night unchaperoned, this time with two men, was beyond scandalous but quickly realized the absurdity of such concerns in her current situation. "Thank you," she said instead. "You're very kind." Daniel's weathered face creased in a smile. "Not kindness. Justice. Montgomery and men like him have taken enough from these mountains and the people who truly belong here." As night fell, Daniel shared stories of the mountains, of the Ute people who had once thrived there, and of the gradual encroachment of men seeking fortunes in gold and silver. Xavier added occasional comments, revealing a deeper knowledge of the area's history than Rose had expected. "How long have you two known each other?" she asked during a lull in the conversation. "Sullivan saved my life 3 winters back," Daniel replied, glancing at Xavier. "Blizzard caught me on the lower slopes, would have frozen if he hadn't found me." Xavier shrugged uncomfortably. "You would have done the same, perhaps," Daniel acknowledged, "but few white men would risk themselves for an old Indian." Rose studied Xavier with new appreciation. There were layers to this man she was only beginning to glimpse. "You should rest," Daniel told Rose, rising from his chair. "Tomorrow will be a long day. You can take the bed. Sullivan and I will manage out here." Rose wanted to object but found herself suddenly exhausted. The emotional and physical demands of the past 2 days had taken their toll. She accepted Daniel's offer with gratitude, and soon found herself lying in his simple but comfortable bed, listening to the murmur of men's voices from the main room. She couldn't make out their words, but the low rumble of Xavier's voice provided an unexpected comfort. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, despite Montgomery's threats and the danger that surely awaited them, Rose felt safer than she had since arriving in Colorado. With that thought, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the mountain air cool and clean through the cabin's small window. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Daniel prepared a hearty breakfast of cornmeal mush, dried venison, and more of his strong coffee. As they ate, he outlined his plan to show them the hidden spring. "The entrance is concealed behind a rock fall about 30 yards into your mine," he explained. "The passage beyond leads to an underground chamber where the spring surfaces before flowing back into the mountain. How did you discover it?" Rose asked, fascinated by the idea of such a secret within her own property. Daniel's eyes grew distant. "My grandfather showed me when I was a boy. Our people have known of it for generations. We called it the Whispering Water because of the sound it makes flowing over the stones." "And you're certain this water has medicinal properties?" Xavier asked, practical as ever. Daniel nodded. "I've used it myself for years, and I've seen what it can do for those with lung ailments. The doctor who came, he was convinced it could be bottled and sold as a cure." "Which explains Montgomery's interest," Rose mused. "But why not simply approach me with an honest offer?" Xavier's expression hardened. "Because Montgomery doesn't make honest offers. He takes what he wants by whatever means necessary." They set out shortly after breakfast, taking a different trail than the one they had used the previous day. Daniel led them through dense forest and over rocky outcroppings, following paths visible only to his experienced eyes. By midday, they had circled back to the Silver Spur mine from an approach that offered cover and visibility of anyone who might be watching the area. "No one's been here since yesterday," Xavier confirmed after scouting the surroundings. "Let's move quickly." Inside the mine, Daniel moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating the dark tunnel with ease. Near the back wall, where Rose had always believed the mine ended, Daniel began shifting smaller rocks from what appeared to be a natural rock fall. "Help me with these," he instructed. Together, the three of them cleared enough debris to reveal a narrow opening, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Daniel lit a torch he had brought and led the way, Xavier following and then helping Rose navigate the tight passage. The tunnel beyond was different, smoother, as if shaped by water rather than tools. It descended at a gentle angle for about 20 yards before opening into a cavern that took Rose's breath away. The chamber was perhaps 30 feet across, its ceiling rising to form a natural dome. Stalactites hung like stone icicles, some meeting stalagmites to form columns that seemed to support the very mountain above them. But most remarkable was the pool in the center, crystal-clear water that glowed with an almost ethereal blue light from some mineral content Rose couldn't identify. "The whispering water," Daniel said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the cavern. Rose could hear it now, the gentle, musical sound of water flowing into the pool from a crevice in the wall and then disappearing through another opening on the opposite side. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "And valuable," Xavier added, crouching beside the pool. He dipped his finger in the water, tasting it cautiously. "Minerals, different from any spring water I've tasted," Daniel nodded. "The doctor took samples, performed tests. Said it contained lithium, magnesium, and other elements beneficial for treating lung inflammation." "So this is what Montgomery has been after all along," Rose said, understanding dawning. "Not silver, but something potentially more valuable." "A medicine that could save thousands of lives," Daniel confirmed, "worth far more than any silver vein." Xavier stood, his expression troubled. "But also something that should be used for the good of many, not the profit of one man." Rose looked at him, surprised by the sentiment. "You don't think it should be commercialized?" "I think," Xavier said carefully, "that something with the power to heal shouldn't be controlled by someone like Montgomery, who would make it available only to those who could pay his price." The statement revealed yet another layer to the man Rose was beginning to admire more with each passing hour. Not just a cowboy or a miner, but someone with principles that ran deeper than she had initially assumed. "What do you suggest, then?" she asked. Xavier looked from Rose to Daniel and back again. "I'm not sure yet, but I know we need to protect this place until we figure it out." Daniel was nodding his agreement when a sound from the tunnel behind them froze all three in place, the unmistakable noise of rock shifting, followed by a man's voice. "They've gone in here, boss." Montgomery had found them. Xavier moved instantly, extinguishing his lantern and pulling Rose behind one of the stone columns. Daniel melted into the shadows on the opposite side of the cavern, his dark clothing making him nearly invisible in the dim light that filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the glow of lanterns. Rose's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. Xavier's arm around her waist was both reassuring and distracting. She could feel the tension in his body, coiled and ready for whatever might come. Victor Montgomery entered the chamber first, two armed men behind him. His tall, imposing figure was impeccably dressed even in these surroundings, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed, his expression one of triumphant satisfaction as he surveyed the cavern. "The whispering water," he announced, his voice echoing. "Finally." "You were right, Mr. Montgomery," one of his men said, approaching the pool. "It's just like the old Indian said." Rose felt Xavier stiffen beside her at the mention of an old Indian. Had Daniel betrayed them? She glanced across the cavern but could no longer see where the older man had hidden himself. "After all these years of searching," Montgomery continued, "to think it was on the Gallagher claim all along," he chuckled. "Sometimes fate has a way of working in one's favor." "What should we do about the woman, sir?" the second man asked. "She never left town like you ordered." Montgomery's expression hardened. "Find her, And Sullivan, too, they can't have gone far. He knelt by the pool, dipping an ornate silver flask into the water. Once I secure the legal rights to this claim, they won't be a problem anymore. And if they resist, the first man asked, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Montgomery straightened, pocketing the flask. Then do what's necessary. This discovery is worth more than a troublesome woman and a cowboy with a misplaced sense of justice. The casual way he dismissed their lives sent ice through Rose's veins. Xavier's grip on her tightened, a silent warning to remain still and quiet. We should seal this entrance, Montgomery decided, looking back at the tunnel, until I can bring in my own men to secure it properly. What about the old Indian who told us about this place? One of the men asked. Montgomery waved a dismissive hand. He's served his purpose. Pay him the agreed amount and make sure he understands the consequences of speaking about this to anyone else. The men began gathering rocks, preparing to seal the passage as Montgomery made a final inspection of the cavern. His gaze swept across the shadows, passing over Rose and Xavier's hiding place without pausing. For a heart-stopping moment, Rose thought he had seen them, but he turned away, satisfied the chamber was empty save for his own party. Minutes that felt like hours passed as Montgomery and his men worked to block the tunnel. The sounds of shifting rock and grunted efforts gradually faded as they completed their task and retreated the way they had come. Xavier waited several long minutes after the last sound died away before releasing his hold on Rose. "They're gone," he whispered, "but they've sealed us in." Rose stepped from behind the column, her legs trembling slightly from the prolonged tension. "What do we do now?" "There's another way out," Daniel's voice came from across the cavern as he emerged from the shadows. "Follow the water." Xavier turned to the older man, suspicion clear in his stance. Montgomery mentioned an old Indian who told them about this place. Daniel spat on the ground. "Not me." "Probably Joseph Two Feathers. He would sell his own mother for whiskey." Xavier studied him for a moment, then nodded, accepting the explanation. "You said there's another way out." "The water flows through a passage on the far side," Daniel confirmed, moving toward the spot where the pool drained away. "It leads to a smaller exit about half a mile down the mountain. It's tight in places, but passable. Will we need to swim?" Rose asked, eyeing the narrow opening with trepidation. "No," Daniel assured her. "There's a ledge alongside the water channel. Stay close to me." The passage beyond the pool was indeed narrow at points. They had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The sound of running water accompanied them, sometimes a gentle murmur, other times a rushing torrent as the passage descended. Daniel moved confidently ahead, occasionally pausing to help Rose navigate particularly difficult sections. Xavier brought up the rear, watchful and silent. Rose could sense his concern, not just for their immediate safety, but for the larger situation they now faced. Montgomery knew about the spring, had samples of the water, and clearly intended to claim it for himself. After what seemed like hours of difficult progress, the passage began to widen, and fresher air reached them. Finally, they emerged onto a small ledge halfway up the mountainside, concealed from below by a tumble of boulders and scrub pine. "We made it," Rose breathed, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. Daniel nodded, surveying the valley below. "For now, but Montgomery won't give up easily." "No," Xavier agreed grimly. "And now he knows we're still here." "What will he do next?" Rose asked, dreading the answer. Xavier's expression was hard. "He'll file a claim-jumping charge against you, probably claim you abandoned the mine. With his influence over the local judge, he could have legal possession within days." "Can he do that?" Rose asked, alarmed. "He can try," Daniel said. But he'd need proof you intended to abandon the claim. Which I never did, Rose insisted. Even when he threatened me, I never signed anything relinquishing my rights. Xavier's expression changed, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's it, he said. Montgomery needs you to either abandon the claim or sell it to him legally. Otherwise, his ownership would always be contestable. So as long as I refuse to sell, Rose began. He can't legally take possession, Xavier finished. But that also means you're in danger as long as you're alive to contest his claim. The implication hung heavily in the air. Montgomery had already shown he was willing to go to extreme measures to acquire the spring. We need to get back to town, Xavier decided. File a formal statement with the claims office reinforcing your ownership and detailing the spring's discovery. Montgomery controls the claims office, Daniel reminded him. Yes, but he doesn't control the territorial governor, Xavier countered. And I happen to know Governor Rout is very interested in mining practices that benefit the common good. Rose looked at him with renewed curiosity. You know the governor of Colorado Territory. Xavier's smile was enigmatic. I've done some work for him in the past. What kind of work? Rose pressed. The kind that involves investigating men like Montgomery, Xavier admitted. The governor has been concerned about monopolistic practices in the mining industry. This revelation shifted Rose's understanding of Xavier completely. Not just a cowboy or an ex-miner, but someone with connections and purpose beyond what he had revealed. You've been watching Montgomery all along, she realized. Xavier nodded. For about 6 months now. But I needed evidence of wrongdoing, something concrete the governor could act upon. And now you have it, Daniel said, gesturing back toward the sealed mine entrance. Montgomery attempting to seize a valuable medicinal resource through intimidation and fraud. We still need to document it properly, Xavier cautioned. Which means getting Rose safely to Denver to speak with the governor directly. Denver is a 2-day ride, Rose pointed out. Montgomery will have men watching all the roads out of Black Hawk. Not all of them, Daniel said with a sly smile. There are ways through these mountains that only a few know about. I can guide you to the Central City Road. From there, it's a straight shot to Denver. Xavier considered this. We'll need supplies, fresh horses. I have horses at my cabin, Daniel offered. And enough provisions for your journey. What about you? Rose asked the older man. Won't Montgomery come after you as well when he realizes you've helped us? Daniel's weathered face creased in a grin. Let him try. These mountains have protected me for 40 years. They won't fail me now. As they made their way carefully down the mountain toward Daniel's cabin, Rose found herself watching Xavier with new eyes. The man who had stepped forward to help her seemingly on a whim was actually engaged in a much larger mission. Was his interest in her genuine, or merely part of his investigation? The question troubled her more than it should have. After all, their acquaintance was barely 2 days old. Yet in that short time, he had risked his life for her, shown her kindness and respect, and awakened feelings she hadn't expected to experience again after the disappointments that had driven her west. At Daniel's cabin, they quickly gathered what they would need for the journey to Denver. Fresh horses were saddled, provisions packed, and a rough map drawn showing the mountain trails they would follow to avoid Montgomery's men. Travel only at night for the first day, Daniel advised as they prepared to leave. Montgomery will have men watching the main trails, but they won't expect you to move after dark. Xavier clasped the older man's hand. Thank you, Daniel, for everything. Just make sure that spring stays free for those who need it, Daniel replied, his dark eyes serious. That water has healed my people for generations. It shouldn't belong to one man. I promise, Rose said impulsively, stepping forward to embrace the older man. If it's within my power, the spring will be used for the good of many. Daniel seemed momentarily startled by the gesture but returned the embrace with gentle dignity. Go now, he urged. You have a long journey ahead. As they rode away from the cabin, following a narrow deer trail that wound through dense forest, Rose found herself fighting a curious mix of emotions: fear for what lay ahead, determination to protect her inheritance, and an increasingly undeniable attraction to the enigmatic man riding beside her. Xavier seemed lost in his own thoughts, his expression grave as he led the way through the gathering dusk. The silence between them stretched, comfortable yet charged with unspoken questions. Finally, Rose could contain her curiosity no longer. Why didn't you tell me you were working for the governor? Xavier glanced at her, then returned his attention to the trail. At first, because I didn't know if I could trust you. Later. He paused, considering his words. Later, because I didn't want that to be the reason you accepted my help. What does that mean? Rose pressed. Xavier reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his features were etched with sincerity. It means that somewhere between your standoff with Montgomery and discovering the spring, this became more than an investigation to me. The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Rose's chest. And what is it now? Xavier's gaze held hers, unwavering. Something I wasn't looking for, something I'm not sure I deserve. Before Rose could respond, a distant sound caught Xavier's attention: horses, multiple riders, moving quickly through the forest below them. Montgomery's men, he whispered, instantly alert. They must have found Daniel's cabin. The moment shattered, reality intruding with cruel timing. They urged their horses forward, abandoning the conversation for the more pressing concern of escaping their pursuers. The next hours were a blur of tension and focused determination. Xavier led them through increasingly rugged terrain, doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail, taking advantage of every stream crossing to obscure their tracks. Night fell completely, the forest becoming a maze of shadows, but Xavier navigated with uncanny precision, as if the mountains themselves guided his path. It was nearly midnight when they finally paused, finding shelter in a small canyon where a spring provided water for their horses and themselves. We've lost them for now, Xavier said, his voice low despite their isolation. But they'll pick up our trail again by morning. How far are we from the central city road? Rose asked, dismounting stiffly. The hours in the saddle had taken their toll on muscles unaccustomed to such prolonged riding. About 10 miles, Xavier estimated, but it's rough country between here and there. We'll rest for a few hours, then push on before dawn. They made a cold camp, no fire that might betray their position, sharing jerky and hard biscuits from their supplies. The night was cool but not uncomfortable, the mountain air crisp with the scent of pine. Xavier arranged their bedrolls close together beneath a rocky overhang that offered some protection from the elements and concealment from prying eyes. As they settled in for their brief rest, Rose found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of him just inches away in the darkness. Xavier, she said softly, if we make it to Denver and see the governor, what then? He was silent for a moment, considering. If the governor acts on our information, Montgomery could face serious charges. At the very least, his influence in Black Hawk would be severely diminished. And the spring? That would be for you to decide, Xavier replied. It's your property after all. Rose rolled onto her side, facing him though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. Earlier, you seemed to have strong feelings about how it should be used. Xavier shifted, mirroring her position. I do. I've seen too many people suffer from mining diseases, good men choking to death on the very dust that made others rich. If that spring could help them. He trailed off, emotion evident in his voice. You lost someone, Rose guessed softly. My father, Xavier confirmed after a pause. He was a miner in California before we moved to Texas. Dust took him slowly, painfully. No medicine helped. Rose reached out impulsively, finding his hand in the darkness. I'm sorry. Xavier's fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. It was a long time ago. But it shaped you, Rose observed, made you the man you are now. And who is that? Xavier asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his question. Rose considered her answer carefully. A man of principle. Someone who defends those who need defending, even at cost to himself. She hesitated, then added more softly, someone I'm very glad appeared when I needed him most. Xavier's thumb traced a gentle pattern across her knuckles. I'm not sure I'm worthy of such an assessment. I think you are, Rose replied with quiet certainty. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Then Xavier's hand released hers, only to find her cheek, his touch feather light as he traced the line of her jaw. We should rest, he murmured, though his actions belied his words as he drew imperceptibly closer. Yes, Rose agreed, making no move to increase the distance between them. In the darkness, with danger still pursuing them and uncertainty ahead, Rose felt the brush of Xavier's lips against hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. The kiss was gentle yet insistent, carrying the weight of emotions neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. That was not part of the governor's assignment, he said, a rare note of humor in his voice. Rose smiled, though she knew he couldn't see it in the darkness. I should hope not. He kissed her once more briefly before settling back. We need to be moving again in a few hours. Try to sleep. But sleep proved elusive for Rose, her mind replaying the kiss, analyzing what it meant, what future, if any, might exist for her and this complicated man once their current danger was past. By the time Xavier roused her for their pre-dawn departure, she had reached no conclusions, only the certainty that her feelings for him had progressed far beyond gratitude or simple attraction. They rode hard through the early morning hours, the terrain gradually becoming less rugged as they approached the main road to Central City. Xavier remained vigilant, frequently checking behind them for signs of pursuit, but it seemed they had successfully evaded Montgomery's men for the moment. The sun was fully risen when they finally reached the road, joining a sparse but steady stream of travelers, miners heading to work, merchants transporting goods, the occasional stagecoach rumbling past. We'll be less conspicuous among others, Xavier observed as they settled into a more moderate pace. But we should keep moving steadily. It's still a full day's ride to Denver. Rose nodded, fatigue beginning to take its toll after their night of interrupted sleep and hard riding. Do you think the governor will see us immediately? He will when he hears what we have to tell him, Xavier assured her. Governor Rout has been looking for an opportunity to check Montgomery's growing influence in the mining districts. And after that? Rose asked, the question that had kept her awake now finding voice. What happens after Montgomery is dealt with? Xavier glanced at her, understanding the deeper question beneath her words. That depends on many things, he said carefully, including what you want to do with your life once your claim is secure. And what about what you want? Rose pressed. Xavier's expression softened. What I want has changed considerably in the past 3 days. Before Rose could ask him to elaborate, the sound of approaching horses from behind caused both of them to tense. Xavier signaled for them to continue at their current pace, not wanting to appear as if they were fleeing, but his hand moved closer to his holstered pistol. 4 riders appeared around the bend behind them, traveling at a canter. As they drew nearer, Rose's heart sank. She recognized 2 of the men from Montgomery's office in Black Hawk. "Keep riding," Xavier instructed quietly. "Don't look back." They maintained their steady pace, but the riders behind them were closing the distance rapidly. Rose fought the urge to spur her horse to a gallop, knowing it would only confirm their identities if there was any doubt. The riders drew alongside and one called out, "Miss Gallagher." "Mr. Sullivan, what a coincidence meeting you on the road to Denver." The speaker was Thomas Reid, Montgomery's chief clerk and right-hand man. His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold as he matched their pace. "Mr. Reid," Rose acknowledged stiffly, "we're on private business." "What a shame," Reid replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Mr. Montgomery was hoping to conclude your business in Black Hawk before you left. He's quite concerned about your welfare, traveling these dangerous roads." "Her welfare is not Montgomery's concern," Xavier said, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable warning. Reid's smile faded. "Mr. Montgomery begs to differ. He has a vested interest in Miss Gallagher's mining claim and feels negotiations were interrupted prematurely." "There are no negotiations," Rose stated firmly. "The Silver Spur mine is not for sale." Reid exchanged glances with his companions. "I'm afraid Mr. Montgomery will be disappointed to hear that. He was hoping we could persuade you to return to Black Hawk with us to discuss the matter further." "We have pressing business in Denver," Xavier replied, his posture shifting subtly, preparing for whatever might come next. Reid sighed dramatically. "I was afraid you might say that." He nodded to his men who spread out, 2 flanking Xavier, one moving closer to Rose. "I must insist you reconsider." Xavier's hand moved to his gun, but Reid was faster, drawing his pistol and aiming it directly at Rose. "I wouldn't, Sullivan, not if you value the lady's life." Rose felt fear coil in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give Reid the satisfaction of seeing her terror. "What's your plan, Reid?" Xavier asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Shoot us on the open road with witnesses everywhere." He nodded toward a stagecoach visible in the distance ahead. Reid smiled thinly. "Nothing so dramatic. You're simply going to accompany us to a quiet spot off the road where we can discuss Mr. Montgomery's generous offer in privacy." Rose knew what that meant. They would never reach Denver, never speak to the governor. Montgomery's men would ensure their silence one way or another. Xavier seemed to be calculating their options, his gaze darting between Reid, his men, and the surrounding terrain. The odds were not in their favor, 4 armed men against 1, with Rose's safety hanging in the balance. Just as Reid was about to speak again, the distant rumble of approaching horses caught everyone's attention. Around the bend ahead came a cavalry patrol, 6 soldiers in Union blue, led by a lieutenant whose sharp eyes took in the tense standoff immediately. Reid cursed under his breath, holstering his weapon with practiced casualness. "Another time, perhaps," he muttered, signaling his men to fall back. As Montgomery's men retreated, the cavalry patrol drew closer. The lieutenant raised a hand in greeting. "Everything all right here, folks?" Xavier nodded to the officer. "Just fine now, Lieutenant. We're on our way to Denver to see Governor Rout on urgent business." The lieutenant straightened in his saddle, suddenly more attentive. "The governor, you say? What's the nature of your business, if you don't mind my asking?" "Information regarding illegal activities in the Black Hawk mining district," Xavier replied. "Information the governor has been seeking for some time." The lieutenant studied them both, his gaze lingering on Rose's travel-worn appearance before returning to Xavier. "The governor is a personal friend of my commanding officer, Colonel Harrison. If your business is truly urgent, perhaps we can offer assistance." "We would be grateful for an escort," Xavier said, relief evident in his voice. "We have reason to believe there may be further attempts to prevent us from reaching Denver." The lieutenant nodded, making a quick decision. "Sergeant Miller, take Jones and Williams and escort these citizens to Denver. See that they reach the governor's office safely." "Yes, sir," the sergeant replied, signaling to two of his men. As they continued their journey, now with 3 armed cavalrymen as escorts, Rose felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The immediate danger had passed, though she harbored no illusions that Montgomery would give up so easily. "That was fortunate timing," she murmured to Xavier as they rode. "More than fortunate," Xavier replied with a slight smile. "Governor Rout increased military patrols on this road last month after a series of stagecoach robberies. I was counting on encountering a patrol eventually." Rose shook her head in admiration. "You seem to have thought of everything." "Not everything," Xavier admitted. "I didn't anticipate Reed catching up to us so quickly. We were lucky. Or perhaps it was fate," Rose suggested. "Like you said before, sometimes the path we're forced to take leads us exactly where we need to be." Xavier's expression softened as he glanced at her. "Perhaps you're right." They rode through the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take refreshment. With their military escort, they made good time, the miles passing steadily beneath their horses' hooves. By late afternoon, the first buildings of Denver appeared on the horizon, a growing city of approximately 20,000 souls, the political and commercial center of Colorado Territory. The soldiers escorted them directly to the Territorial Capitol building, an impressive structure that housed the governor's offices. Despite the late hour, lights still burned in several windows, indicating that the business of governance continued. Sergeant Miller spoke briefly with the guards at the entrance, explaining their presence. After some discussion, and the examination of Xavier's credentials, which Rose was intrigued to discover he carried, they were admitted, and led to an antechamber outside the governor's office. "The governor is in a meeting," an aide informed them, but he left instructions that Mr. Sullivan was to be admitted immediately upon arrival. Xavier nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you." Rose raised an eyebrow as the aide departed. "You seem to have considerable influence here." "The governor values reliable information," Xavier replied simply. "I've provided it in the past." Before Rose could inquire further, the door to the governor's office opened and 2 men emerged, deep in conversation. They nodded to Xavier and Rose as they passed, their expressions curious but respectful. The aide reappeared. "The governor will see you now." John Rout, appointed governor of Colorado Territory by President Grant just the previous year, was a robust man in his mid-40s with intelligent eyes and a businesslike manner. He rose from behind his desk as Xavier and Rose entered, extending his hand first to Xavier, then to Rose. "Sullivan," he greeted, his tone indicating familiarity. "Your message said it was urgent. I assume this is Miss Gallagher?" "Yes, sir," Xavier confirmed. "Rose Gallagher, owner of the Silver Spur Mine in Black Hawk." Governor Rout gestured for them to be seated. "I understand from your message that Victor Montgomery is involved. I must say, I've been waiting for concrete evidence of his questionable business practices for some time." Over the next hour, Xavier and Rose detailed their experiences, Montgomery's threats, the discovery of the medicinal spring, the attempts to force Rose from her property, and finally, the encounter with Reed on the road to Denver. The governor listened attentively, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. When they had finished, he sat back, fingers steepled in thought. "This is precisely the sort of evidence we've been seeking," he said at last. "Montgomery has been consolidating power in the mining districts for years, using methods that skirt the law but have been difficult to prosecute." "What happens now?" Rose asked. "Now," the governor said, standing and moving to a cabinet from which he withdrew a decanter of brandy and 3 glasses. "We prepare legal proceedings against Montgomery for attempted claim jumping, intimidation, and possibly conspiracy to commit more serious crimes." He poured 3 modest measures, handing glasses to Xavier and Rose. "I'll dispatch marshals to Black Hawk tomorrow with warrants for Montgomery and his associates. In the meantime, Miss Gallagher, your claim will be placed under territorial protection." "And the spring?" Rose asked, accepting the brandy but not drinking. "What will happen to it?" The governor looked at her with interest. "That depends largely on you, Miss Gallagher. It is your property, after all." Rose set her glass down untouched. "I've been thinking about that. If the water truly has medicinal properties, shouldn't it benefit as many people as possible?" Governor Rout nodded approvingly. "A commendable sentiment. What did you have in mind?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Rose admitted, "but I know I don't want it controlled by one person for profit alone." "There are options," the governor suggested. "The territory could purchase the rights to the spring, ensure it's developed for public benefit. You would be compensated fairly, of course." Xavier, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke. "Or perhaps a partnership between Miss Gallagher and the territory. She maintains ownership but works with territorial authorities to ensure access for those in need." The governor considered this. An interesting proposal. It would set a precedent for cooperation between private enterprise and public interest. He smiled at Rose. "Something to consider, Miss Gallagher, once the immediate legal matters are resolved." The conversation continued, details discussed, plans made. It was well past midnight when the governor finally stood, signaling the meeting's end. "You've both had a long journey," he observed. "I've arranged accommodations for you at the Tremont house. My aide will show you there. We can continue our discussions tomorrow after you've rested." Rose felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as they left the governor's office. The events of the past few days, the emotional and physical toll, suddenly caught up with her. Xavier noticed her faltering steps and offered his arm for support. "Almost there," he murmured as they followed the governor's aide through the quiet streets of Denver. "You've been remarkable today." Rose managed a tired smile. "I've had excellent support." The Tremont House was one of Denver's finest hotels. A 3-story structure with elegant furnishings and attentive staff who, despite the late hour, showed them to adjacent rooms with every courtesy. At her door, Rose paused, reluctant to part from Xavier despite her fatigue. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly, "for everything you've done." Xavier's gaze was warm in the dim hallway light. "No thanks necessary. I was doing my job." "Was that all it was?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a job." Xavier stepped closer, one hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "You know it wasn't." His kiss was tender, a promise rather than a demand, and Rose found herself leaning into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. When they parted, Xavier's expression was serious. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring challenges of its own." "And after tomorrow?" Rose couldn't help asking. Xavier smiled, the first full, unreserved smile she had seen from him. "After tomorrow, Rose Gallagher, I hope to convince you that Black Hawk still has something worth staying for." With that, he squeezed her hand once more and stepped back, allowing her to enter her room. As the door closed between them, Rose leaned against it, her heart racing despite her exhaustion. Whatever the future held, she knew with sudden clarity that she didn't want to face it without Xavier Sullivan by her side. The following days in Denver were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, meetings with territorial officials, and negotiations regarding the future of the Silver Spur mine and its hidden spring. Governor Rout proved true to his word, dispatching marshals to Black Hawk who arrested Victor Montgomery on multiple charges, including attempted claim jumping and criminal intimidation. Reports filtered back to Denver of Montgomery's shock when confronted with warrants bearing the territorial seal, his indignation quickly giving way to desperate offers of compromise as he realized the extent of the case against him. His long-time grip on Black Hawk was broken, his influence diminished as associates scrambled to distance themselves from his downfall. Throughout it all, Xavier remained by Rose's side, offering guidance, support, and increasingly, tenderness that went beyond their shared ordeal. In quiet moments between meetings, they spoke of the future, of possibilities neither had considered before their paths crossed. The governor's offer to purchase a controlling interest in the spring is generous, Xavier observed one evening as they walked through Denver's streets, enjoying a rare moment of leisure. You could return to Boston in comfort if you wished. Rose shook her head, her arm linked through his. Boston has nothing for me now. My future is here. She glanced up at him, a question in her eyes. At least I hope it is. Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Are you certain? Life in the West isn't easy, especially for a woman alone. Who says I have to be alone? Rose countered, bold in a way she never would have been before meeting him. Xavier's expression softened, his hands finding hers. Rose Gallagher, are you proposing to me? Would that be so terrible? She asked, a smile playing at her lips despite the vulnerability she felt. No, Xavier replied, his voice low and serious. It would be the greatest honor of my life. He drew her closer. But traditionally, I believe it's my place to ask. Rose felt her heart quicken. Then perhaps you should. Xavier glanced around at their public surroundings, then led Rose to a small, quiet park nearby. As dusk settled over Denver, with mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky, he took both her hands in his. I had planned something more elaborate, he admitted. But I find I can't wait any longer. He took a deep breath. Rose, when I told you to stay in Black Hawk that first night, I never imagined how completely you would come to matter to me. These past days have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, principled, compassionate. Rose felt tears gathering in her eyes as Xavier continued. I'm not a perfect man. I've made mistakes, taken paths I'm not proud of, but I promise you this: I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust and your heart, if you'll have me. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small silver band with a single modest stone. I got this today, he explained. It's not fancy, but it's perfect. Rose interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. Xavier held the ring between them. Rose Gallagher, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me in Black Hawk, helping others and making our own way? Yes, Rose whispered, then more firmly, yes, Xavier Sullivan, I will. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and gathered her into his arms, Rose felt a sense of rightness, of having found home in the most unexpected place. 2 weeks later, they returned to Black Hawk as husband and wife, married in a simple ceremony in Denver with Governor Rout himself in attendance. The town they rode into was markedly different from the one Rose had nearly fled. Montgomery's absence was palpable. His former associates, either facing legal consequences of their own or hastily reforming their business practices under territorial scrutiny. The The Silver Spur mine, with its precious spring, was now operated under a unique arrangement Rose had negotiated with territorial authorities. She maintained ownership. But the medicinal waters were available to any who needed them, particularly miners suffering from lung ailments. A modest fee from those who could afford it funded free access for those who couldn't. Xavier resigned his position as the governor's investigator, choosing instead to manage the mine's operations and develop a small cattle ranch on adjacent land they purchased with part of Rose's settlement from Montgomery. And Tanner's cabin, where Rose had taken refuge on that fateful night when a land baron had ordered her to leave by dawn, and a cowboy had declared she wasn't going anywhere, became the foundation of their first home together. They expanded it, adding rooms and comfort, but preserving the central hearth where they had first taken shelter together. On their first anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Xavier presented Rose with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it with curiosity. "Open it," he encouraged, his arm around her shoulders. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was her father's pocket watch, now restored and polished to a brilliant shine. "Xavier," Rose breathed, lifting it carefully. "How did you—" "Daniel helped," Xavier explained. "He knows a craftsman in Denver who specializes in timepieces. I wanted you to have a piece of your father with us, working again, marking our time together." Rose leaned into him, tears of gratitude and love blurring her vision. "It's perfect, thank you." Xavier kissed her temple gently. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Sullivan." "Happy anniversary," Rose replied, her free hand resting on the slight swell of her abdomen where their first child grew, "to many more." As darkness settled over Black Hawk, bringing with it the glitter of stars and the gentle songs of night creatures, Rose reflected on how differently her story might have ended had Xavier Sullivan not stepped forward that evening, defying Victor Montgomery and changing both their destinies in the process. A land baron had ordered her to leave by dawn. A cowboy had said she wasn't going anywhere. And in that moment of defiance, they had found not just justice, but a love neither had been looking for, a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home and as healing as the whispering waters that flowed beneath them.